In response to the Durham Report, a Republican senator had a truly unhinged response and essentially called for the end of American democracy. I know that sounds hyperbolic, but we'll get to the clip and you can judge for yourself. I couldn't even process what was going on when I saw this clip. But up front, apologies, I need to give you some context, so it's going to take a second to actually get to the clip so that you understand what's being responded to by Tommy Tuberville in this interview moment. So after years of this investigation being hyped up, the Durham Report has finally been released. I'll give you a little bit of background as to what the Durham Report is, but first to give you my general overview on the subject, especially when you set it next to what Trump and Fox News and right-wing media said would be exposed by the Durham investigation. The report is an absolute nothing burger. So let's get into it. First, just what is the Durham Report and John Durham's investigation? To quickly recap for everyone, since I know it's been a while since any of this has been in the news, the FBI investigated Russian interference in the 2016 election, as I'm sure you're aware, and specifically also the claim put forward in what was called the Steele dossier that Trump was working directly with the Russian government to win his election. As we sit here today, we now know that while it is true, multiple of Trump's 2016 campaign officials were in communication and connected with people in or associated with the Russian government, and Russia did attempt to interfere in the 2016 election, Trump and the Trump campaign were not directly involved in any coordinated effort with the Russian government to help him win, even if they welcomed the effort by Russia based on the findings of the investigation. The Mueller investigation. This is from PBS. The Mueller investigation resulted in roughly 36 criminal charges, including, or I should say, at least there's not evidence of that, right? Including convictions of a half dozen Trump associates, and concluded that Russia intervened on the Trump campaign's behalf and that the campaign welcomed the help, but Mueller's team did not find that they had actually conspired to sway the election, creating an opening for critics of the probe, including Barr himself, to complain that it had been launched without a proper basis. So that was the big investigation. And while Trump was president, Bill Barr, attorney general, Trump was super unhappy, as you can imagine, and maybe you remember, with that investigation because it did hurt him politically. And it uncovered deeply concerning aspects of his 2016 campaign, the officials and their connections and Russia's efforts and all of that. So Bill Barr appointed a special counsel by the name of John Durham to investigate the investigators, as they said. His job was to look into the origins of the Russian investigation to see if the FBI only investigated Trump for these things to hurt him politically. Now, in reviewing what was brought forward in the report itself, there really isn't meaningful new information about this investigation that has been revealed, or new information that's been revealed by this that's being put forward in this report. Nothing super notable that's new. He highlighted, John Durham, that is many flaws in the investigatory process on the part of the FBI, and I think most of that was largely previously known, should be addressed, seems to be getting addressed. And then John Durham's takeaway, which I should note, John Durham has been credibly accused by many of being politically motivated himself, being pressured by William Barr to uncover something to give Trump. But his takeaway was that the Russian probe into Trump never should have happened. I disagree with that deeply, and the reason is because I think the FBI, while they didn't do the investigation perfectly, absolutely there were mistakes and they should have been more sensitive to kind of the political repercussions of their actions and all that. But number one, there's no evidence their missteps were politically motivated, and investigators will make mistakes. But the primary issue being examined here, or what would be very concerning, is if those moves were deliberate to hurt a particular political candidate, in this case, Trump. A good bit of proof that the FBI wasn't motivated to just hurt Trump, help Hillary, is that around this same time, the FBI came out and announced shortly before the 2016 election, right before the 2016 election, that they were reopening their investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails, which was a devastating event for her campaign. So if they were working on behalf of Democrats, why would they ever do that? They could have delayed the announcement or, whatever to protect Democrats, but they didn't. The other huge reason this should have been investigated is, as I previously mentioned, officials within Trump's campaign were connected with people in the Russian government in concerning ways, and that has since been verified both by the Mueller investigation and by a bipartisan Senate Intelligence Committee investigation led by Republicans. One of the prominent examples, as CNN writes was this: that then campaign chairman Paul Manafort was working with Konstantin Kilimnik, a Russian intelligence officer, and sought to share internal campaign information with Kilimnik. The committee says it obtained, quote, some information suggesting Kilimnik may have been connected to Russia's 2016 hacking operation. It concludes Manafort's role on the campaign, which he was the campaign chairman. His role, quote, represented a grave counterintelligence threat. And there are more examples than just that, but that gives you a sense. And I want to remind you that this was a committee and an investigation that was Republican-led. It was a Republican-led Senate panel. Sorry, this is getting cut off on screen. So you can't say this was just Democrats trying to dishonestly portray the situation, right? But again, the claim that there was some coordinated effort between Trump and his campaign that was uncovered with the Russian government to interfere in the election, they were conspiring to do so, that wasn't proven, which is where Durham says this should have never been investigated. But I think it's super fair to be concerned by the connection and the connections that were present within Trump's campaign. And then also there were multiple convictions that came of the Mueller investigation, largely relating to individuals lying to the FBI and about their Russian contacts, or bank fraud, not disclosing foreign bank accounts, stuff like that. Whereas Durham's investigation led to one plea deal, but the two cases that were brought to trial ended in acquittal. So the massive criminality promised by MAGA just didn't end up coming to light. So to summarize, and then we'll get to this clip and some of the responses outside of just Tommy Tuberville. The FBI definitely made mistakes. There was, though, good reason for them to be concerned with the Trump campaign's connections to Russia, the Russian government. And it was good that they investigated the interference because we were able to find out that Russia was trying to put their finger on the scale toward Trump and help Trump with the election. And the campaign obviously was very okay with that. But the investigation should have been run tighter. But this report as a whole is sort of a flop in my mind, after especially what was promised by the right wing, MAGA, Fox News. We'll get to Sean Hannity saying this proved him right. No, it didn't. And they were saying that the FBI will be exposed for trying to steal the election from Trump with this, and all of that. That didn't get uncovered. But Durham took issue with certain aspects of the investigation, and his stance is that the investigation never should have happened. But I think that is a flawed bit of analysis, to say the least. And then his advice to the FBI is this from the New York Times. Mr. Durham said he was not recommending any wholesale changes to FBI rules for politically sensitive investigations and for national security wiretaps, which have already been tightened in recent years. He did recommend that the Justice Department consider assigning an individual to internally challenge steps taken in politically sensitive investigations. So he's saying just have some more oversight, have an official that when these types of politically sensitive investigations are done, they oversee it and challenge the investigators to make sure they're not incorrectly acting when it comes to investigations that have a lot of political ramifications, which that's perfectly fair. Sure. Have a little extra oversight. I'll never have a problem with that. Well, what I just gave you, I see as, obviously, because that's why I gave it to you, reasonable, nuanced, thoughtful analysis, okay? Tommy Tuberville went in a very different direction. This is what he had to say in response to this.
I can't even talk about it. You know, it's so bad. But if people don't go to jail for this, American people should just stand up and say, listen, enough's enough. Let's don't have elections anymore. I wish there was a special investigation into the voter fraud, because it was outrageous what happened. But nobody wanted to look into it because they were afraid they were going to be called out. And so it is what it is. I hate that it's happened.
So Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville says, quote, if people don't go to jail for this, the American people should just stand up and say, listen, enough's enough. Let's don't have elections anymore. When you're saying something that we know is not going to happen, and you're saying if the thing doesn't happen that we know won't happen, people going to jail for this because the investigation's over, And he tried to send people to jail and failed because he didn't present convincing evidence in court. Then you're just saying, let's do the thing that I'm following up that statement with. If people don't go to jail for this, which they won't, then he's saying the American people should just stand up and say, let's not have elections anymore. Quote, let's don't have elections anymore. Tommy, that's bonkers. I say no to your proposition. And then he, of course, says stuff about voter fraud, which shows you how credible he is, thinking that there should be an investigation into all the mysterious voter fraud that we've had months to find and hasn't been found. And Trump paid researchers himself to investigate that fact. They came back to him, said, we couldn't find this evidence of widespread voter fraud that made Biden win the election. And countless recounts have been done, countless audits by right-wing entities, and all these different things, 60 plus court cases brought forward, or that the Trump campaign, the Trump team were involved in, fail. So obviously there's not evidence of that. And that gives you a sense, like I said, of how credible Tommy Tuberville is on this topic. But he thinks because of the findings of a report that, like I said, are really a nothing burger, and the result of failed prosecution efforts by this special counsel, John Durham, again, 2 acquittals, he was 0 for 2 in court. That means we shouldn't have elections anymore. Yikes. Well, as I previously mentioned, Sean Hannity took this report to mean that he was right all along, even though he predicted a stealing of the election would be uncovered.
Years and years and years of waiting with the 2020 election safely now in the rearview mirror. The DOJ has finally published the findings of the Durham probe. Remember that? Now, long story short, every single thing that we reported to you on this program, we were correct. We've been vindicated time and again, especially today. Everything the media mob reported for almost 3 long years, day in and day out, nothing but lies and conspiracy theories. After years and years.
I don't know if we're reading the same report, my man. Very, very strange. Funnily enough, Steve Bannon, who is as right-wing as it gets, he, for the opposite reasons as me, but he also sees this investigation by John Durham as a failure.
And people come to me all the time, Steve, why don't you spend more time on Durham? Why don't you do this? Durham had correct me if I'm wrong, brother, but that's the epic failure of Durham. That shows you, when you say the courts, there's got to be some kind of driver prosecuting. There's got to be a prosecutorial attitude in the courts. The courts just aren't going to sit there and just get like gods deem this to be true. You have to bring cases before them. Isn't this the epic failure? Am I missing it? I'm not a lawyer, but isn't this the epic failure of Durham?
But then that's the analysis, but he doesn't see that as a sign of maybe all the claims we're making of the FBI trying to help the Democrats. And again, even though they did the thing around the same time with Hillary Clinton that was really damaging to her campaign, they were really doing 4D chess to figure out how to help Hillary Clinton and hurt Trump, and all these crimes were committed in the process, but none of it can be proven in court. And the 2 things that were brought to trial by John Durham ended in acquittals. Why don't you take that as a sign as maybe you're wrong, instead of John Durham is just not as effective as he could have been at proving this, which is true because the evidence wasn't there, not because something's wrong necessarily with the investigatory process of John Durham, other than it probably being politically motivated. And so often that's the case with some of these conversations we have with, or conversations we observe from right-wingers, where they'll observe the same facts sometimes. They'll say none of the claims of voter fraud they'll accept that they haven't been successfully shown in court, or the court hasn't sided with those claims, but it's because it's all being covered up and all the judges are corrupt, not because maybe the evidence just isn't there. And it's the same thing with this. But there it is. Tommy Tuberville, the notable part of this, I think, is that he says, why not, you know what? If no one's going to go to jail for this, let's just not have elections anymore.